Welcome back to JavaScript Fundamentals. Today we'll continue to look at objects, but we'll primarily focus on how we can create and use our own objects. In JavaScript, there's a data type called getThisObject. Now notice the capital O in object. In JavaScript, the data type names begin with an uppercase letter. So string, number, Boolean. These are all data types in JavaScript, and we've talked about these, but it's one thing to talk about them, and then it's one thing to actually see their names, because these are actually functions in JavaScript. We could call these functions to create a string object, or a number object, or a Boolean object, but we typically don't do that because one, it makes our code a little less readable, and two, we can just use the literal values to create those object values. So these functions begin with an uppercase letter to distinguish themselves from other functions in the language. So whenever we see a function that begins with a capital letter, we can think, aha, this is a data type. And while there are built-in data types in JavaScript, such as object, string, number, and Boolean, we can also write our own data types. Now that's getting into something a little bit more advanced, which we might save for another course, but that ability is there for us. And this casing that's used is called Pascal casing. It's a lot like camel casing, except the first letter begins with an uppercase letter. So if we had a data type name that had two words, the first letter would be uppercase, and then the rest of the letters of that word would be lowercase. And then the second word's first letter would be uppercase, and then the rest of the word would be lowercase. So it's exactly like camel casing, except for the first character. It's uppercase. Okay, so every value in JavaScript can be boiled down to this object data type. This is the granddaddy of all other data types because everything inherits from object. Inheritance is an object-oriented programming concept, and it's something we will not discuss in this course because that would be straying into advanced JavaScript programming. But I at least want you to know that inheritance in programming is very much like genetic inheritance from a parent to a child. Children typically inherit traits from their parents, like hair color. Inheritance in programming is very much the same thing, in that a child data type inherits properties and methods from its parent data type. For example, the object data type has a method called toString, and because all other data types inherit from the object data type, every object in JavaScript, be it a string object, a number object, a Boolean object, or an object that we have created, it has a method called toString as well. So let's look at an example. Let's create a variable called num. We'll give it a value of 8. And if you'll remember, whenever we converted numbers to strings, we did so by concatenating the number with an empty string. That would convert it to the string 8. Well, we can actually write this in a different way. Instead of performing a concatenation operation, we can just simply call the toString method. And the number data type is getting this toString method from the object data type. So toString does exactly what its name implies. It converts the object's value to a string. So instead of concatenating with an empty string, we can call toString and get the same exact result as we got before. And in fact, by doing this, we actually make our code a little more efficient, because what JavaScript actually does with this version of the conversion, it calls num dot toString, because it knows it cannot add a number to a string, so it needs to convert the number to a string, and it does so by calling num.toString. It does it behind the scenes, but it's being done there. So if we get rid of the concatenation, then we have saved ourselves one operation and made our code a little bit more efficient. So that's a little tidbit about inheritance. It's a way that we can reuse code by basing a data type on another data type. Now I said that we can create our own objects, so let's do that. And the first way we'll do so is by using the data type function. Now remember, I said that object with a capital O is a data type in JavaScript, and also remember that I said that this is actually a function as well, so we can call it like a function, except that we have to do one little thing. We have to use an operator called new. Because this is no ordinary function. This is what's called a constructor function. Its purpose is to create an object of type object. And the new operator tells the JavaScript engine that we want to create a new object. So this creates an object for us. We can actually create a string object in the same way by calling the string constructor. And we could also pass an initial string value if we wanted to. But as I said earlier, we typically don't want to do this. One, because it's a little more difficult to read. And two, it's just a lot faster just to create the string using the literal notation. So this is one way we can create an object, by using the constructor function. And after we have created the object, we can populate it with properties and methods, because what we have right now is the most basic object that we could have. It has just a handful, well, not even a handful of properties. It has like 2 properties and then just a handful of methods. So since this is an object that we want to create, it would be nice if it had properties and methods that meant something to us. So let's rename this from obj to person, and let's add some properties and methods that would be related to a person object. So the first thing we will do is create a property called first name. To do that, we use the name of the object, person, followed by the dot, and then the name of the property that we want to create. So first name in this case, and then we need to give it a value. So we don't have to declare anything, we don't have to use the var keyword, we just simply have to use the name of the object, the dot, and then the property name, and this will create the property for us. So let's do the same thing and create a last name property. And it's the same principle, object dot last name equals the value. And now let's give this person object a method. Let's call this getFullName, and it's going to concatenate the first name and last name properties together. Now, a method is nothing more than a function that is attached to an object. So it's written just like any other function. We are creating an anonymous function and assigning it to getFullName. So it's basically just the same as writing var getFullName equals function, except we have attached getFullName to the person object. So all we have to do is person.firstName will concatenate a space and then person.lastName. So let's go ahead and call this so that we can see it in the browser. So getFullName, let's go to the browser, F5 and undefined. Whoa, that would be because I didn't return this. So let's go back, refresh, and there we go. And naturally, you could use your own name if you wanted. My name was the first that came to my mind. Now, notice that we are using the person object inside of the getFullName. We typically don't do this. In fact, we use another word called this. You will hear this referred to as the this variable or the this object or simply this. I try to say the this variable because this can be confusing, because I could say, well, this is used in this method to refer to this, and so the this variable is very special in JavaScript, and it's the source of a lot of confusion. The this variable refers to the object that is calling whatever method that it is we are calling. So in the case of getFullName, the this variable refers to the person object because getFullName is a method of the person object. So instead of using person inside of this method, we could use this. And whenever we go back to the browser, we will get the same results because the this variable refers to this person object. So this is one way that we can create objects. We can create the object with the object constructor, and then we can populate the object with a property or method one at a time. Now, we typically don't write code like this anymore. This code would be at home in the early 2000s, but naturally, as time moves on, the way that we write code changes. And that's especially true with JavaScript. So instead of doing it like this, we use what's called object literal notation. Yes, objects have a literal value in JavaScript. So the object literal notation is a lot less typing, so it's more terse. I consider it easier to read. It's a lot less repetitive, and it gets it all done in one statement. So it's a complete win-win as far as I'm concerned. So let's comment out the lines of code that we just wrote so that we can compare it with object literal notation. And we start the object the same way, var person equals, but then we want to use the object literal. Well, that is a pair of curly braces. So this line on line 9 is the exact same, or it has the same results as line 1, var person equals new object. But instead of calling new and then the object constructor, we simply just use two characters, the opening and closing curly brace. And then anything defined inside of this curly brace are going to be properties or methods of this person object. So let's start with the first name property. We don't have to specify person because that's automatically being done for us by specifying it inside of the curly braces. So we specify first name, and we don't use an equal sign. We use a colon. So it's very different than before. But the colon in this case is exactly like the equal sign. So we just give it a value. And then we use a comma because we want to list another property. So let's do last name. We'll use the same syntax. And we also want to do the get full name method. So we'll want to put a comma again. Get full name function, and then we will return this dot first name, this dot last name. We'll get rid of that extra line, and that's it. So instead of person equals new object, person dot first name equals Jeremy, person dot last name equals McPeak, person dot get full name equals function, return blah 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 blah, we have var person, and then first name, last name, get full name, and then that's it. So we have just created the same object. Well, it's not the same object, but it's an object called person with a first name, last name, and get full name method. It has the same exact functionality, the same what's called API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, which is the properties and methods of this object. So it has the same API that the previous person object did, but we did so with essentially less code. So whenever we run this code again in the browser, we will get the same results as we got before. Jeremy McPeak. This is a pretty good place to stop for today. But before we go, I want to address a question that you might have, and that would be, why should we use objects? Well, the whole point of object-oriented programming is to logically organize data, and really logically organize complex data so that it's easier to work with. The person object that we created isn't very complex. I mean, honestly, it has two pieces of data, and that would be relatively easy to keep track of in code. But let's say that we're writing software for a company to manage their employees. The data that we would have on each employee would be huge, and in order to keep track and work with that data in our code, it would make sense to use an object, because then we can have one employee object, and all of the data for that single employee is right there for us to use and work with. So object-oriented programming allows us to work with complex data in a simple way. I'm not saying that we will always work with complex data. There's going to be times when we have simple data and we don't need an object. But for the times when we do need to organize that complex data, we do have the ability to create an object and use it. So with that, we will end today's lesson. Have a good one.